Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. Dani Katz is here with me. It is the second day in a row that we have been on the box together. This is episode number 57 of Words. Dani, how you doing? Good afternoon, Wednesday afternoon.
I'm doing as well as can be expected given all of the ridiculous chaos plus Aries season.
Right? There we go. I feel like I've been having one ongoing conversation because I was with you and Michael yesterday morning, and then this morning I was with Michael and Howdy, and now I'm with you again. It's just like we're playing like tag, like relay races or whatever.
Plus,
right?
Michael's been continuing the conversation from yesterday with me behind the scenes on email, and then Sally with that synchronistic conversation. It's
that was so weird, right?
And then it's just, and now here I am with you again.
But I mean, in some weird fucking way, we totally called it that there was going to be a Scientology thing, right? So
I know, it's like I wish it landed in the show, and it is what it is.
It's weird that I for some reason had to call out Sally and her leg warmers during the show, and then it became Sally that delivered the Scientology blow.
And for all the years that I've known Max, and for all the years that Sally and I have talked about the fact that we all know Max, and then the boom of like, P.S. he grew up a Scientologist, like,
So for people who don't know what we're talking about,
go watch our show.
Episode number 40 of Playing the Glass Bead Game, which was recorded yesterday and will be out sometime probably late this week or early next. I don't know, fucking time is all crazy. It will be there. Playing the Glass Bead Game is a private series, so either join up, or if you haven't had your complimentary episode yet and you'd like to have this one, then you can do that. And you can understand what we're talking about Sally and Max and leg warmers and Scientology and all that. So anywho, all right, so we've just been passing the baton around, you know, like running in circles around the high school track for the last 24 hours with each other. All right, so okay, so today we're going to talk a bit about, well, this show is going to be about Aubrey Marcus.
Yes.
The show is going to be about Aubrey Marcus, and for like, it's starting to set up some grander shows coming down. When I say grander, I don't necessarily mean better, but there's a few other links to the chain that we've been putting together about the op. And today we're
laying some groundwork. We're easing you guys.
We're easing our way in. Yeah. And so today it's going to be Aubrey Marcus and a little bit Daniel Schmachtenberger, who you have mentioned before, but I am almost 100% certain very few people in our audience are really familiar with, because he's not someone that I was ever familiar with until you mentioned him. And I really listened to very little of him because I just, to me, I know that I'm listening to mind control when I hear him talk. And so I just tune it out. Like, you have to dazzle me with better mind control if you want me to listen. I'm definitely vulnerable to it if it's good, but his isn't. Right. It is for some people, but I just have already been through that layer. But I think it's important because there's many people who haven't been through his layer and who are going to be subject to it here coming up shortly. So today we're going to talk about Aubrey Marcus and Daniel Schmachtenberger. And before we get into what you have to present, because I know you have things to present, I just want to get your thoughts on Aubrey Marcus in general, because he's come up tangentially in several shows over the last year or so. The biggest dive I've done on him, we never put the show out because it was just got too deep and too weird and too personal. And I might be willing to share a few of those things here today. But he is a character for sure that is part of this, even though he's not necessarily talked about that often. Is certainly not, and he is a little bit in conspiracy circles. But you know, I think that people mostly see him as like Joe's jack-off friend or something, one of Joe's jack-off friends, and he's certainly a lot more than that, whatever you think of him. So anywho, what are your thoughts on him just as we get into this?
Okay, I'm glad that this is where we're starting, because I was going to ask you the same question, because I know that you've mentioned having thoughts and mentioned doing shows. So I'm really curious, especially because I know that he's not hardcore on your radar, what your take on Aubrey is.
So tell me yours first, since I asked first. You just passed that. I'm not ready for my leg of the race yet.
Okay, so my take on Aubrey is that he's groomed for a position that I think kind of similar to your take on Tim a couple shows back. I'm not sure that he knows that he's being controlled. I'm not sure that he knows that he's part of an op. What I know about Aubrey Marcus is that he wedged his way into the like biohacking performance space through his relationship with Joe Rogan and his product On It. I do like Onnit's memory and focus formula. I want to say that. So I know that he used to sell fleshlights for his father, and I think his stepfather, and I think his father has some questionable relations or background with some intelligence stuff. But I know that he was definitely propped up by Joe Rogan and kind of given this platform. And then also similar to like a Tim Ferriss, where it's like, okay, he's done a couple psychedelics, so now he's like very forward facing about, you know, his time in Peru and his work with, you know, Iboga, and he'll like use all that kind of pronunciation and wear his beads, and like it's very, he wears that on his sleeve. He's incredibly well spoken and intelligent, to the point that I wonder if it's not scripted and or rehearsed, because, and we'll get into it, we'll get into it in the if we get to the Heather Brett show that he just did, but he has an interesting way of engaging with his audience that feels quite contrived to me, but I do want to give him props for being intelligent. I feel like a lot of ops are leaking through him, and the story that I've made up, and I don't know this, is that he's so stoked to be given such a big platform, to have left the fleshlight porn world and to be this like thought leader, that any guests that they put on, like he'll kind of take it where he needs to take it. He had a very public relationship with this coach, Whitney, and they were very public about their polyamory.
What is her last name? Do you know?
I don't, she's blonde. It's not his current. So this is what's weird, is he had this long-term relationship with this coach. I think they're both in Austin. She's very blonde, very like that kind of Texas.
Witten Love.
Yeah. And okay. They were like very public about their poly, and then they had a very public breakup.
Whitney Miller.
And then he was off my radar, and now all of a sudden he's married.
All right. Okay, so this is Whitney Miller. Let's see. Let me see. I'm not super familiar with her. Is this her?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's her, the blonde. I don't know this person at the top, but the blonde, yeah, with the Miss United States winner and the far left.
Okay, gotcha. So it looks like there's a couple of Whitney Millers who are all involved in similar kinds of things, but this is the Whitney Miller you're talking about.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me just see. Whitney Miller, Aubrey Marcus.
No, I don't know much about him, but what I do know is all the people he has on his show are part of the op.
Okay, so here they are.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Okay. So Aubrey Marcus. So first of all, the latest thing I've noticed about Aubrey Marcus, and I just noticed these things. So this is Aubrey, this right here is Aubrey Marcus's, that's what his symbol looks like. He has like an A sitting on top of an M.
Yep.
And there's another business in Austin that has an A sitting on top of two M's that I've passed twice in the last couple of weeks in different locations. So they have multiple locations. So he literally, this looks like an old business when I see it's an Austin Motor. It's like an automotive, like auto repair place. Okay. Looks like it's been around for years. So that was there. And then his is like that, but just the A over the M. So it's kind of interesting. Like it's been drawn to my attention, these symbolisms over the last few weeks. So Aubrey Marcus is, I have to say that of all of the people in the reality that has been spawned from the Joe Rogan sort of nexus point, Aubrey Marcus is the one that I have the most compassion for and the most conflict about.
Okay.
And probably the one that I feel in a lot of ways maybe the most resonance with, as far as like what may be going on and personality and whatnot. So I was first introduced to Aubrey Marcus I don't know if it was the first time that he was on Joe Rogan's podcast, but it was the first time I heard him on Joe Rogan's podcast. And this was when I was living in downtown Los Angeles. So this had to be about 2011. It was when they were first starting on it, and he had just returned from the Amazon and from he'd been down there, he'd done ayahuasca, he'd had an amazing journey. And the takeaway from his journey was that he needed to come home and start on it. Okay. And so I think this was the first time he was on Joe Rogan's after that had happened. Whether that was the first time or not, I don't really know. That was the first time I'd ever heard anybody really talk in any significant way that like grabbed my attention about ayahuasca. Right. So he gave, a report about his trip, like during part of the podcast, and he explained it. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. It's very fascinating. I was very taken with the conversation. And then afterwards, they were talking about how this, turned into, okay, I have to come back and make this supplement company. And at that point, it was kind of new, and they were really calling it like nootropics a lot, right? They weren't really calling it a supplement company, or they were talking about nootropics, and there weren't all these tangential products. There was roll on and roll off. And there was Alpha Brain, and that was it. They didn't have anything else yet, right? And so I, being a good little mind controlled Joe Rogan listener, right, that like bought the Alpha Brain and the roll on and the roll off. I think I still have the roll on and the roll off. I don't think I ever remembered to take it at the appropriate times. I did take the Alpha Brain. I didn't notice anything. Okay. So it was early on. But I really liked it. And I had been listening on and off to a few episodes here and there of Joe Rogan before that, but that was the one that turned me into like a all the time listener of Joe Rogan podcast, at least for a while, for a period of time. And I thought that was interesting. And I did not at that time understand that the Fleshlight commercials had anything to do with Aubrey Marcus. I didn't understand that Joe Rogan was part of On It, right? Because they didn't really talk about that. They presented it as like, oh, this is Aubrey's thing. And like, I didn't know where Aubrey came from or how I think Joe was talking about having known him from, working out or the MMA world or I don't know, right? So I didn't understand that there was an op there yet on the Joe Rogan thing. So that was my introduction to him. And then I heard him, but like, I think it was interesting because after that, he was on Joe Rogan once or twice more, I think. And then he's really not been on Joe Rogan's podcast for a really long time, though I believe they're still friends. And they obviously own the business together. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
But okay, sorry, go ahead, continue.
So it's been interesting to me that he hasn't been on Joe Rogan's podcast for a really long time. And I don't know if they decided that was a conflict of interest or I don't know, because of I have no idea, right? It became pretty clear to me. I didn't understand that was part of the biohacking thing until they clearly supplanted, like Joe Rogan had Dave Asprey on, and then they basically went and created copycat products and trashed Dave Asprey in order to promote On It and all of that kind of stuff. Like that was pretty obvious to me sort of as that was happening.
Yep.
I heard Dave Asprey on Joe Rogan's podcast after I had heard Aubrey Marcus on, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. It was a foggy time. But the Dave Asprey was a really meaningful one to me too. Like I learned a lot during that. I printed out his sheet of how you should eat. I played around with that. I bought some, of his stuff and whatever. I lost track of Aubrey Marcus for a period of time, but understood that he was the owner of On It and started to see those products pop up everywhere and understood the controversy about the stuff to Dave Asprey and whatnot. But never anywhere did I think that like Aubrey Marcus would become like a podcaster and a thought leader pretty much on his, like in his own right. Although I felt like he was a good storyteller with the ayahuasca experience. And by the time I started paying attention to Aubrey Marcus's YouTube channel, which wasn't really that long ago, I didn't realize he'd been having these conversations with lots of people for a long time. And he's another one of these who's popped up in the wake of Joe Rogan that are clearly, it's part of the Joe Rogan op, right? You have like Lex Friedman and Tim Dillon and Theo Vaughn and all the MMA guys who have podcasts. these are all, whether there's any financial connection or not, this is like part of the germination of the entire, like, you know, germinating the entire field of poppies or whatever kind of thing. So I only started listening to things on his podcast like maybe a year ago, maybe a little longer ago than that. And like, this is hard for me to admit, but a lot of times I like listening to him. I think he has some good guests on, and I think the line of conversations that he takes with them, and some of the guests, when I say he has good guests on, it doesn't mean that I believe the guests or trust the guests or whatever, but they're people that are interesting and entertaining to listen to. And the conversation goes into some different places than Joe does or Tim does or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about Aubrey is to me, he shows all the telltale signs of being the child of an intelligence agent. So he's a person who's been exposed to a lot of things in his life, right? He's been exposed to travel, to culture, to fame, to certain, you know, inside rings of training and athletics and sports and whatnot, right? Like it's a little bit different than like being the child of a celebrity, right? But like he has all these unique experiences. And my guess has been he had a really hard time finding his own footing and his own voice. And at a certain, you know, and he struggled for, you know, a really long time. And I don't know how aware he is or was, and at what point he became aware of the fact that like there's an op and that his dad is part of the op and that he somehow is part of this kind of thing. And that he even clearly understands what it is. And then at a certain point, like when you're in that position, like there's all these struggles that you go through, right? Like, you know, I have struggled in a different way in my life than my sister has struggled, right? My sister's struggles have largely been, you know, she didn't get into the schools she wanted to go to on round 1 or round 2, finally round 3. She has had some health issues that I maybe haven't had, or some, you know, something like that. But she hasn't struggled so much with like the nature of reality, with drugs, with like not feeling like you can live up to the expectations of the family. And I can feel in Aubrey that he has been through some of that. And that for his own self, through, I think, all of his explorations, I do think those are genuine. The fact that he got to have them, someone may have been intentionally like this, like he's what, like I consider myself on a certain level, he's what I would call MK option. Let the child explore the things that they're interested in. In fact, encourage that they do that. Observe them while they do it. And then the things you learn from observing them, you can sort of either let them lead a movement, or you can take the information you extract and use that to, you know, program the larger culture around people who are interested in the same ideas. But let him do his thing. Let him find his way. Let him struggle. Let him do all that stuff. Let him learn from that. And then at a certain point, I think he came to terms with himself, right? And when I say come to terms with himself, I don't know that that means he understands completely what he's involved in or what he's doing, but he suddenly, all the struggles he had, he was able to like pull them together, like all the disparate strands of hair, he was able to pull them together into a braid that looked cohesive and he could make sense of, and he knew what to do. He had a purpose. He could intake experiences that like integrate them and then express them in a way that he could turn into a business, turn into a lifestyle, and turn into like like having a whole life, a complete life that he felt gave him meaning, right? And so because that is a true struggle for him, he brings this sort of genuine, I do think he's genuinely curious. And I do think he takes these experiences in and he appreciates them and he makes sense of them in a certain way. I don't know that he has the intellect or I think he's bright because he's obviously able to give great, tell these experiences in a very clear way for lots of people to understand. But I don't know that he has the intellect to understand the largesse of this operation. For him, his dad is just running a business that he doesn't understand, might be a front for something intelligence. I don't even know exactly what it is. I have not looked into his father other than I've listened to other people's research about his father and come to the understanding, I don't know if it's his father or stepfather, that he owns Fleshlight, and that that there seems to be some intelligence agents connections and things like that. And the fact that the Fleshlight was the first sponsor of the Joe Rogan podcast is interesting. And, you know, but kind of should tell you the nature in some ways of what's going on here, and how some of these puds are pulled. I was going to say strings are pulled. Let's go with puds. So I think his struggle and his coming to acceptance and coming of age and all of that kind of stuff is genuine. And he struggled really hard to achieve a place in his life, in his mind, where he felt like he's okay now. Like he made it through his struggles. He has the respect of his family and his peers and things like that. And that feels like a real achievement to him. And if, because I'm sure it's occurred to him, if some of the byproduct of that is that some of his work is in the furtherance of an agenda that he either isn't completely on board with or doesn't completely understand, like it's okay because like he, you know, he has not been okay to this point, and whatever he's doing is okay, he is okay. And these are things he is truly, genuinely interested in. And if he spends his entire life trying to fight off things he doesn't know or doesn't understand, it's going to lead him back into the life of like out of balance, debauchery, all that kind of stuff that caused him to struggle. So I think that like that's part of what's going on. And I think he has an interesting combination of people on who are totally controlled, partially controlled, and don't really seem to be controlled at all. Or if they are controlled, they're controlled by things that are about stuff that isn't what you and I are talking about.
Yeah.
They may be beholden to commercial or financial interests or some other ideology, but not the thing that is like steering the fate of humanity in a way that frightens you or I or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So he has this interesting mix. And then like, I think he's allowed more uncontrolled or less controlled conversations to happen on his podcast than Joe or Brett and Heather or David Fuller or any, that he's allowed it to go off into these different territories. And I think, I don't know if it's him allowing or whoever's controlling him, they have to allow it that way. Just like if there's anyone controlling me, if they tried to control me, it would become obvious I was being controlled. Right? If they tried to put the hammer down, don't talk about this or whatever. All right, so let them do their thing. And then we'll find a way through a future guest or some other connection that he has or something to sort of reel that loose one back in. But it's better just to let it go. And also, it then creates resonance with the people who otherwise wouldn't trust him.
Yeah, my sense of exactly what you're talking about is that he has a wide pen and he doesn't, there are a lot of doors around it that just don't open, and he doesn't, he's not curious. So I think because his curiosity isn't pushing him beyond, and he's not questioning why someone is putting this person on the show, that he is allowed that wider breath, because a part of me thinks he's just happy to be in the position that he's in. And like, you know what I'm saying? And it's like one of those things, like, to not question too hard, why is he given this big platform? I think he's just so grateful for it that he's that he's easier to work with, right? And I don't think there's that pressing curiosity about the construct in which he's working. I think there's curiosity about the topics within the construct. But I think that's why they can kind of leave him alone, because he's not going to go outside of those bounds. It's like a dog with that magnetic collar.
They don't have to put a cage. They don't have to put a cage.
Exactly. So if he rolls around in his own shit while he's in the boundaries, you know, or like kills a cat, it doesn't matter, because they know he's not going to go outside those boundaries.
Right. Or even if he does, he's going to be like, oh, that hurt, I'm not going to do it again. So he might do it once, he might, right, kind of thing. But I also think, I think I think that there's probably a combination of guests that he likes to have on and guests that whoever's producing or handling recommend. And probably some of the ones that are the most interesting are the ones people he'd like to have on, right? And then, you know, because of the nature of his personality, the ones that are being delivered to him, he says a few things that are more interesting than other people say, or he asks a question or makes a comparison that they wouldn't get from someone else.
So another big piece, which I think is really prominent about him, is that whenever he has a guest, he does a lot of research and his mind goes to, he makes a point of making connections that I think other podcasters aren't making. And what I get from that, and again, I'm just playing pop psychologist here, I've never met him, but what I get from him is a deep insecurity about his level of intelligence and that he's going the distance to prove how smart he is. And I think he is quite smart in certain ways. But I also think that because he's not questioning a lot of other things, that he, and I think a lot of people who are involved in this op, think that it's a good op and think that it's in service to whatever he knows about it. I think that he thinks that it's a good thing. And I don't think that he knows, because I do think my sense is that he's well-intended and that he's just a useful idiot.
Yes. And I think that like what you're talking about, these connections that he does, those connections, in some ways, they're a less like wildly out of the bounds kind of thing than I do, right? And part of it is from the amount of crazy experiences one has had with drugs, with running around with criminals, with doing weird stuff and whatever. And you see this sort of interesting parallel between things that are happening in realities that are, you're told are within the lines, but they seem to parallel the ones that are outside the lines. And so you're making that connection, right?
Yeah,
and
oh, sorry, go ahead.
And it is intelligent, but it's not the intelligence that the academic class is used to dealing with. And I think he sometimes feels like he's trying to get them to say, yes, yes, Aubrey, you're very smart. When like you and I, because we've been outside of those bounds, like we already see it as smart. We don't need him to show it and prove it, but he's trying to win over the academic class with his sort of psychedelic street smarts or whatever, right?
I think you're right. And the other piece that I see, which I think speaks to that deep-seated insecurity, is like you and I, every show we have, I'm guessing you and I are making so many more connections than we're actually speaking to, right? Because there's only so much time we have and there's a flow of conversation. And, you know, you interrupt less than I do, but even still, it's like, there's a lot that we're not speaking to. And I notice, and especially on the show with Brett, where he will interrupt the natural flow of the conversation to assert his intelligent connection. Like that's very prominent in all of his shows. And so what I get from that is like, he's not just proving to his academic guests, but he's proving it to himself. He's proving it to his audience. He's proving it to mommy and daddy. Like there's something larger there that he has to always get it in, even when it doesn't flow.
So I had, when I first started, I had to do that. I had to get it in. He's been doing this a long enough time now that you'd think that he wouldn't be, except for, like you said, the people around him probably require more tap dancing than the people around me, or he thinks they do, because
well, plus he's like a muscly guy and he's good looking. And so it's, you know, this like, I'm not like a beefy, pretty face thing, maybe.
So that there's another thing. There's two other things I want to point out about him. So as to this not opening the doors, that right kind of thing. So, okay, so I do this, but I don't do this around off limit topics in terms of controversial issues. Okay. But sometimes people with me, and it'll be Laura and like the Rolfer did this recently, and a few other, every once in a while my dad even will, like they will want to open the can of worms of my mother. Okay. And like how I really feel about all of that. And I'm smart enough to be very clear on the fact that I probably do have a lot of deeply buried and embedded issues about my mother. I have some that I'm very well aware of, but I don't right now feel conflicted about my mother in any significant, yes, can I acknowledge I'm conflicted about my mother, but I would have to go fishing around for a why, okay? And one of the things I've learned through my struggles is that when I begin exploring a problem that hasn't clearly presented itself to me yet, I end up creating a problem that isn't really the one that I have, but it becomes the problem that I have. And it takes me forever to extricate myself from that. Eating disorder, drugs, all of these kinds of things are things that like I didn't really feel like I needed to go fishing around in, but for some reason I decided to go doing fishing around in there anyway. And I ended up creating worlds of problems for myself. right? And so I've learned at this point that like, and this is part of how I have managed to recover so many things about myself and my experience as a kid, is I just wait for it to come up naturally. And when it does, then I deal with it. I don't go fishing just because I think there's a there. It's not information. It's not conspiracy research. It's my life.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't work the same. And so I think one of the things that's happened for him is he probably has had some of that experience himself, and that he grew up in this sort of wild and whatever kind of way. And there was probably things he knew he shouldn't do, but he chose to do them anyway. And he created problems for himself that led to struggles with drugs or excess or getting into some trouble that he didn't really, wouldn't have gotten into on his own. And so when he sees, so it's like he's thinking that the controversial, he hasn't separated his life from controversial topics yet. And if his father is an intelligence agent, which I don't know that he is, but that feels like there's something like that there, maybe there's an uncle, maybe there's a family friend, that like, if you have that close to you, then the conspiracy theory that research becomes the same thing almost as your life.
Yeah.
So he is saying, like, he's basically like, whatever this thing is over here, like there may be a thing there, but so far it's not affecting my life. So I'm not going to open that door. And he's not doing it because he doesn't care about people. He's doing it because he understands the hell that is unleashed on his life when he opens up doors that aren't really about him. Right. And so like, I think that's probably what's happening there. And so for me, it isn't informational. It isn't about this stuff. For me, it's about like, how do I feel about the fact that my mother just left us behind as a kid, right? Like, how do I feel about that? And I know that if I go digging around in there right now, I might open up an ocean of emotions that I can't get out of. And right now I have a lot of work to do. If they come up while I'm working naturally, if something happens, or God forbid something happens to my mother and that thing comes then I'll have to put my work aside and deal with them. But if I decide I'm just going to go dipping my toe in the water just to see what happens, that's always when I find myself in a shithole I can't get out of. And I think
super destabilizing.
Aubrey has I think made the same assessment. And so whenever he feels like, well, that door isn't really about me, and if I touch it, there could be problems, I'm just going to walk to the next door and see if there's something there that is a little less. Yeah,
it totally might be, and you're super intuitive, Miss Cancer, Pisces, all your water. I trust that. I mean, my take and just guessing is like, A, he might not be that interested, and B, he has so many great things going on. Why fuck with it to be marginalized as a conspiracy theorist? Like, it's not, he's got so many great things happening. And I think that those things were gifted to him in a way. I didn't watch it organically happen. All of a sudden he was just like this famous person. It would be like, oh, why fuck with it? Who knows why, but he's not touching the third rail at all.
Yeah, he's not touching the third rail. He's being touched by the third, fourth, and fifth rails, whether he understands it or not. And I just had the thought that maybe the way we deal with this show is I will share some of my awarenesses about him, but I want to do that in the locals or the patron segment or whatever. So let's see if there's anything else you have to say about Aubrey, and then let's move on. You have some clips and you have some stuff on Daniel Schmachtenberger, which is one of the people that's really going to be brought in hardcore through that sort of angle. Do you have anything else you want to say about Aubrey?
No, I have like I said, I have our clips from Schmachtenberger, and then you sent me last week the recent show we did with Heather and Brett, and I have some time code pieces on that show, and I'm curious to know your take on it since you're the one who sent it to me. Okay,
so let's, my final thing I want to say about Aubrey Marcus is that I like him. Like I do like him as a person. I think I like him.
Super cool.
He seems super cool. And I think like I like the diversity of topics that he knows a good amount about and that he's interested in. And he's had a few shows that I just think are excellent. That guy who was like a Las Vegas boss that he had on, and he talked about that like weird drug that they took when they were like in Macau, and he met in a like a conference room, like an extra temporal conference room, and they were able to like show each other what they mean, right? Like I have had those kinds of thoughts and experiences and not been able to sort of classify and explain them in quite the way. And I was like, that show was fucking good and that drug exists and that's going on in a lot of ways that people don't. That was a great show, right? And that's not something you really are going to hear anywhere else. And, you know, at least not on that big of a platform.
Totally. As you say that, it's reminding me, which I'm literally only remembering this moment, that I used to listen to his show all the time. Because I remember he was the one who first put penis envy mushrooms on my radar, listening to his show about that. And I'm just realizing, like, as soon as I clued into this Joe Rogan op, I'm like allergic to all the people's shows because I haven't listened to him in a while until these shows that, you know, I'm going to share today.
It feels like there's almost a formulaic percentage of the number of shows that he has to do that are part of the op, and then the rest are kind of more organic with maybe peppered a little bit of language of the op just to keep people entrained to that, right? Like I hear him talk about sense making, and I hear him talk about a few other words that like have become part of the lexicon of the op people and whatnot. But I'm sure they're used on him as words for trigger words and control words for him. So it would be natural he says that. So I think
I'm also curious what's coming through on it. What's coming through his product line?
We're going to get to that in the other part.
Okay, cool.
We're going to get to that in the other part. So, so that, yeah, this is not like a bash on Aubrey thing.
No.
Like I literally think that like he's a person who has struggled and he's come to a place where he's like, I'm going to do my thing and I'm not going to worry about the fact that other people are piggybacking their thing along on my thing, even though he doesn't understand a lot of his opportunities are just coming because he's a good portal for some of this stuff. I also think that he has struggled and worked hard and put together his own sort of reality and whatnot. And, you know, so I have compassion for him as an entire human being. And also like, hopefully if there comes a moment where there's an opportunity to go, you know what, like this one, I can't really overlook. So I either need to say something or I need to back away from this one and let that be the thing I'm saying. I hope he will do that. That's all I have to say pretty much about him.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
I don't know if he will. I don't have faith one way or the other, but that's all I kind of have to say. Okay, so he talks quite a bit about Daniel Schmachtenberger, who he calls Schmachtenberger, Daniel Schmachtenberger.
Yeah.
And I'd never heard of Schmachtenberger until you brought him up, and he was, you know, making the circles around that group of people, that Heather and Brett Weinstein, the David Fuller, the, you know, I think he's been on Joe Rogan, hasn't he?
So who brought him on Joe Rogan? It's one of the people in the op brought him on Joe Rogan. We should look that up. Did we do a show on that? I think we did. I think that was one of the.
I think it's come up as part of other conversations. I don't think we have wholly focused in on Schmachtenberger other than this idea that
Tristan Harris. It was Tristan Harris.
Sense making is the new trendy cover word for MKUltra and mind control, right? Sense making.
Yeah,
like you
and so
have
that
a
was
sense making coach and a sense making or all this kind.
Yeah.
But it's like NLP. Yeah.
Totally. So Jamie Whelan, Tristan Harris, David Fuller, they're all part of the sense making thing. And the first thing I ever saw on Schmachtenberger, who deals with language in not the same way I do, but he's focused on language, was a series of videos out of Santa Fe Institute. So that was how I first heard of him. And I think Eric Weinstein might, go ahead.
You know, Daniel?
So we had a Facebook exchange going for a while before we were totally on the same page. Then COVID happened. He's a friend of Mickey Willis. And COVID happened and he went into this like fear mongering, you know, totally down with the narrative that was like, wait, where is this coming? And then he hasn't returned any of my messages since. I haven't met him in person. And then there was that thing that we've talked about on this show when that random person stopped me in front of my mailbox. Yeah.
Do you know if he and Mickey are still friends?
So the last I heard was and this was when Mickey was still on Facebook, and I know we're moving over to YouTube. So when the movie that
we're on YouTube now.
Okay.
Oh, okay. No, I got you. Oh, I see what you're saying.
So
okay.
before the movie that Mickey and I worked on came out, I know Mickey was not only still friends with him, but was defending him as not part of the op, not controlled. And on this end of it, I don't think Mickey's super clear or trustworthy in terms of that realm.
Do you think Mickey at this point, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, do you think Mickey is not clear or trustworthy because he's in on it or because he's dense?
I don't want to insult Mickey because Mickey's a dear friend. So Mickey only started waking up to this in like 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like everyone, there's a learning curve.
Yeah.
And so I think he's very new to this path. And I think what happens, which you and I have talked about, and I think David Martin might be the only exception I've seen to this, that fame blinds people to a lot of what's going on. And all of a sudden it comes, there's like a total unconscious first chakra inclination to protect our position and to protect, now it's the circuit. So I don't think he's part of it. I don't think he's been co-opted consciously, but I think it's gotten more complicated since that he's gotten famous, and I don't know how clearly he's seeing things.
I'm just going to give this little seed, and when we do our next show where we're going to get into why all of this matters so much, maybe I'll go into it more. But I see, especially because you say they were friends, right? So in some ways we have the one of them being the thesis, the other being the antithesis for the synthesis they're going to bring in. And I think the synthesis is going to be whatever the Tulsi Gabbard train trails along with it. Because I think that probably like Schmachtenberger, or for Schmachtenberger, Tulsi might be a little more conservative than he's comfortable with. And at this point, oddly, Gabbard is a little bit more progressive than what Mickey's new class of friends would probably prefer. Both sides are overlooking the problems with her. There's a few good things that she says that are reasonable and helpful, but there's a lot of other stuff. But that's going to be something that that's going to be the thing that they reconcile for their consilience project over. Like this is right. This is what it's going to be. It's going to be the person who's going to be able to bridge the gap between these friends who have been pulled apart based on like the politics and the struggle with sense making, are going to experience consilience through what Tulsi Gabbard and that movement in that train is going to be bringing in. And I'm not going to go too far into this, but I was doing a little bit of research on Tulsi Gabbard this morning. And it's kind of hard to identify what she's been doing for her job since she left Congress. She obviously still deploys as part of the civilian defense, sort of her regard service. And she obviously makes 2-minute soundbite appearances on Fox News constantly. But she has joined a different division of the military in Northern California. I knew this, but it's concerned with psychological operations. And I'm going to cut it at that for right now. Okay. And we're going to move forward. Yeah. And I think we're starting to see what's happening here. Yeah. This is going to be the World Economic Forum and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be absolutely like the worst ideas the dissidents on the right and the worst ideas the dissidents on the left have come up with in order to bring us back towards, this sort of space in the middle that has actually no good ideas, but that feels like, oh, we've compromised to reach this. I don't even know what the word consilience means, but it seems like some sort of like reconcile and like moments of silence, like take some quiet reflection time and then reconcile and come back together. I don't know what the word means. What does it mean?
I'm looking it up. It means the agreement of two or more inductions drawn from different sets of data, concurrence.
Okay, so that basically,
and this is, by the way, a telltale sign of this op is overcomplicating what can be simple.
Yeah, so basically they just made a fancier word for synthesis.
Totally.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so that, okay, let's hear your clips.
Okay, so I'm going to share a screen, share sound, because you taught me that. All right. So oh, you know what? Let me, do you think it's good enough to just see it here? I haven't like saved it as,
Probably. I think that's probably, as long as we can hear it reasonably well. Hold on a second. I just had a thought about something and I just want to check something real fast so that I understand what I'm doing.
Sorry, guys, I'm just realizing that I didn't
Okay.
save this as its own movie, so we're doing it. Oh, wait, you know what? Shit.
Make sure, as long as you share sound, it's probably okay.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yeah, stop your screen sharing and reopen it and make sure you've hit the share sound button.
I already shared sound. Okay, so if you can't hear this when I hit play, let me know.
Okay.
You are one of the most intelligent, self-aware human beings I've ever had the pleasure of encountering and conversing with. And you told a story on that podcast about how.
Okay, so this is clip number 1, and there are 2 things that I want to point out. So notice with every single person that you and I have covered on this op, how every podcast host makes a point of saying, you're the most intelligent person I've ever talked to. They say it to Eric, they say it to Brett, right?
Yeah.
We're hearing this all the time. Now, here's the other piece, is that, so Aubrey Marcus's podcast is a very high quality production. Just the intro music and the intro credits had to be thousands and thousands of dollars in the making. I find it really interesting that in this particular podcast, Aubrey's eyes are never at eye level. Did you notice that? Because they're at eye level in all his other podcasts.
Okay, so let's see.
Okay, so here's our next clip. And Daniel, who's being groomed for whatever he is in like his basement.
Well, this is how we get, he seems like an everyman. He's unshaven, his beard is 2 different colors, he doesn't have good lighting.
Oh, his beard is, that reminds me of the Deborah Harry comparison you were making yesterday.
Yes, yeah, right? Because it's very even where the cutoff is, it's not, yeah.
Okay, so we have the standard issue, you're the smartest person I've ever talked to in my life thing. Okay.
So yeah, it's super important to understand if you think you're immune to it, you are not, right? Like there are a number of us who have intentionally curated those experiments. And even while we know we're doing it to ourselves, we're being emotionally affected by it. So we're like, oh, fuck, there's a kind of humility I have to have because I am not immune to this.
Right.
Okay, so what he's talking about here, and we saw this in the Tristan Harris Dark Horse podcast. We saw it in the Tristan Harris, Daniel Schmachtenberger, Joe Rogan. The constant narrative being thrown out is that we are being radicalized and unfairly manipulated by our social media. And if you think you're not, you're stupid because no one can control it. And again, so anyone who doesn't hate Trump, who doubts some of the more prominent narratives or erections or whatnot, you're just being radicalized and controlled by the AI. You're not in your right mind, you stupid little monkey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny how they're willing to cede that much power to social media. But if I were to suggest to Schmachtenberger, I don't think if I suggested this to Aubrey, but if I were to suggest to Schmachtenberger or Brett Weinstein, and we've obviously talked about this with Joe Rogan, the possibility that they were being directly controlled by someone in their inner circle, they would tell me that there's no way they would know if they were being controlled. So it's fascinating to me that they will cede their intellectual power to an algorithm, but they are not willing to confess that there's another human being that may be able to do that because they're smarter than everything but technology.
Right, but keep in mind that this is all theatrics. Like we've heard Joe Rogan state unequivocally that he's not controllable or he would know. And they're less talking about how controlled they are by AI than letting us know that we are and that our thoughts are not our own and that our minds are not our own.
Correct.
Okay.
And our ability to understand that and consciously select something different is kind of the only path, but it's not a really simple one. Now, this is where we actually have to get not just the oneness, but the individuality and what is the right ethics around that, because we haven't got individuality well. Because our models of it are almost exclusively competitive more than synergistic. And so my where I'm the same as others gives me some basis for empathy, but where we have differences, how do we relate to that in a more healthy and enlightened ways has to be just as important a part of the new religion or new philosophy or ethos.
New religion. Notice that.
Friend who I believe you just met, Mark Gaffney, he has this whole
amazing
rabbinic thing on the unique self, which is a big part of the kind of Kabbalistic tradition is. So it's not just Buddhist oneness, and we can all kind of meditate into that oneness, because the moment you leave the meditation, that's not where you're at anymore, right? And that's not the whole story. That's a part of the story, but there's also that oneness embodied and incarnated in unique ways. And so then, is there a way to be able to hold the difference where there is a uniqueness to you and what you can experience and what you can offer, but where that uniqueness, if you and me are both actually unique, we can't compete on the same metrics. Right? Yeah. If I say that we can compete with, like, we're a function of our money and the size of our cocks and our whatever it is for our mate selection thing, and there's like 4 things, we can compete on those and who's a better package. That's actually not uniqueness, that's sameness, right? That's a sameness of a few metrics of selection. At the heart of when you fall in love with someone deeply is something ineffable, it's unspeakable, that is beyond a package, right? There's a taste or a quality of the uniqueness of the thing that you have a relationship with. And so if there is something where the difference of everyone actually has a uniqueness that has the interconnectedness, the quality of oneness, but with a totally unique form to it, then those unique forms can't fundamentally compete. There's no metric to measure or assess it on. And then you can offer something to the world that is different than what I can offer to the world, but where the world is better at my own assessment if you offer it fully.
It seems like still, though, there's the issue of finite resources. But I think the solution that I can see with that is we often think that we want things, but we don't really want the things. We want the sensations
Aubrey
that the
is
things
reading a
give
script.
us.
Aubrey is reading something he previously wrote right now. That is why his eyes are doing that. This is the first time I've ever noticed that he is reading something. Right now, he's having his Joe Biden moment. He's just doing it better.
Okay, and notice that what he just said after Daniel's intellectual word salad pitch for communism was, we don't want things, we want the experience of things. So he's lobbying for this digitized,
the metaverse,
virtual.
Right. Exactly. And so he slipped and he said religion, and the new religion that is going to be brought in. And this is where, like, it's going to be Baha'i. It's going to be Baha'i, but it's going to be like a transhumanist Baha'i, like a metaverse Baha'i, where it's kind of like a blending in a certain way of all the cultures and religions of the world, especially the ones that haven't been front and center for the last few centuries or whatever, but with the addition of virtual experiences of things outside of the parameters that he was sort of just talking about right there. But yeah, okay, so go on.
Okay.
I want people to know too that I'm a significant contributor to the foundations that you're a part of.
We just pause.
He is reading his fucking Oscar acceptance speech right now, or something like that. That's wow. It's like he's forgetting. When you watch like a tennis match or something like that, and at the end that you can see the tennis player trying to remember to thank everyone on his team and the ball boys and the sponsors and all that shit. Wow, that was weird. Okay.
That's interesting. So he's reading this whole thing, which is why his eyes are down, but he just tells us, and this is what we're going to get into on our next show on 58, that he is a significant contributor to Daniel's foundation. Very, very important. Okay.
To the foundations that you're a part of, and I'm going to continue to do that because I really believe in the work that you're doing, as I believe in my own abilities to play some role in this cosmic orchestration. But so if you want to just explain briefly what those are, if people are interested in supporting your work, as we make our way through this thing together.
Push pause.
Yeah.
This is the entire agreement. So so just after listening to this exchange, which I haven't heard before, it is, Aubrey, you can do whatever you want. You're going to channel this through your stuff. This is going to infiltrate everything you do, right? And literally, this is the reason why he has the broad platform and the ability to talk about all the other things he wants to talk about. Forget Brett and Heather, forget whatever version of the COV op he's channeling or whatever. This right here is the deal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is why, just so you guys know, Emily and I working on this show that we've been teasing since like what, December?
Yeah.
Because this is it. All right.
You being an ally in the way that you have has been hugely helpful to work that we've been able to do with talking to key government institutions about shifts that they can make, and also work that we're embarking on now and helping.
Do that. You've never played this for me before,
Yep.
right? This is it right here, dude.
Yep.
All right. And it's coming in the next one, guys, but we have the receipts. Okay.
Government organizations. Here we go.
Education in these areas more widely culturally.
Education.
Something people can check out now is the consilienceproject.org.
Boom.
Consilienceproject.org is the website. A lot of the issues we were talking about today regarding propaganda, social media, culture issues, there's a whole good series of articles on there. We're about to do a series that addresses a 10 article series that is like the most fundamental things about what the state of the world is and what it would take to come to a post-exponential tech viable civilization.
Post-exponential tech viable
civilization. That sure sounds like the Great Reset to me.
/ transhumanist.
Right. Metaverse, blah, blah,
Totally.
Blah. Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, really grateful you have helped us be able to do that work, and would love to have more people.
He's not looking into the camera when he says that either. Both of these people have their eyes all over the place and everywhere but on each other or the camera during this.
Which is extremely, if you watch any Aubrey Marcus, this is not how it normally goes. Okay, last clip.
Our technology's gotten so powerful and it's kind of eroded our social structures and our superstructure. All that's left of the social structures of this kind of liberal democracy period is really like money on money returns and some very limited stuff. And mostly what's left of superstructure is like fairly self-centered nihilism and narcissism and nihilism. But so the development of culture to then have people of, for, by the people create new institutions that we can actually trust, put faith in, have a rule of law that can then bind, guide, and direct the tech so that we can have a future that is high tech and high meaning, high name.
He's talking about creating a government to guide the tech.
Yes.
Right? You and I have been talking about this for years now, and he's actually saying it.
You know, I'm sorry, but as I'm watching this, when you end your screen share, I'm going to look for something because I'm just like, there's someone who I think he is a descendant of that is becoming clearer and clearer to me as I'm watching this.
Okay, so we're almost done. We just have like 40 seconds left.
Nature is kind of the only path. And I see that what you've already been doing with your podcast and where I see it going, conversations we've had being, how do we really help the cultural revolution to be the basis of rebuilding social institutions that can have the power to be able to guide this godlike tech that we have, where we're good stewards of it, is of all the things where I feel hope, it's not the tech. The question is what's going to guide the tech, and it has to be people that have evolved in these ways.
Tech doesn't matter as much as who guides the tech that matters.
Guides the tech, and the other tell. And we've talked about this with Brett does it quite a bit. Eric does it quite a bit. Good, bad, good tech, good guidance. They like these guys that use like 50-cent 7-syllable words when they'll whittle it down to the good, bad, which is a polarity, right? Which necessarily invokes the opposite and reduces it. It's how these guys talk. It's part of the programming. It's part of how they're entraining us.
Are you ready?
Ready.
You know who this is?
No. Karl Marx. Oh my God.
Look at this face.
Dude.
Look, if you could get a side view with a little different hair, right? But the mustache is black like his, the beard is gray, the top is gray, but he's obviously older here. But look at some of these side angles. Look at some of this and then pull back up a picture of him. pull back up one of those clips.
You have screen share right now.
I'm stopping my share.
All right, so let's get to just him. Hang on.
Just imagine with the hair, but look at this. The mustache is black, the beard is gray. Give him another 8 years, 6, 8 years. But look at that face, right? Stop your share.
Well, and totally given, and especially since it's his whole like communist pitch. There is no individuality if we're comparing cocks, blah, blah, blah.
Right?
Totally. You know
Look
that
at
Karl Marx is my cousin.
Really?
Direct descendant. Which I think is part of my karma of why I do this, is like trying to clear the karma.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay.
Dude,
I think I got, that was a good one right there.
really good one.
And this is like digital Marxism. This is post-exponential tech Marxism,
Yep.
right? We're all really focused on critical race theory and cultural Marxism, and nobody is thinking about digital Marxism or this like, right? And
Well,
if you
no one's even questioning it, which has been my issue with tech from the get-go. It's like this unspoken, we must surrender our will and our everything to tech instead of saying, hey, is this where we want to go?
yeah.
And he's
Okay.
leading that.
Okay, let's cut right here.
Yeah.
We're going to put the Weinsteins aside for now. Weinsteins, you get a week off. We'll be back. Don't worry. And we're going to move into a short Afterwords. If you'd like to join us for Afterwords, please go to wordspodcast.locals.com. And this will be a little bit more on Aubrey and what I think might be going on here. Anything else you want to say before we're leaving the public behind? This show, we've decided to try and make the first part of these shows acceptable to YouTube. So today you'll be watching this on YouTube. It's just easier to herd the cats to one place than to many. And
thank you for supporting me by joining me on Locals, DaniCats.locals.com. It's where I'm posting all of my videos, all of my writings, all my essays. It's where I'm building the community to get out of the way of the tech censorship, as well as you're interested in empowered badassery coaching, being your most authentic, empowered, unfuckwithable self, hit me up.
all right, and you guys know where to find me. We'll see you on the other side. All right.